Good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock, and welcome to the May 3rd, 2022 meeting. There'll be 4 board members who are not present. Chairman Quish will not be here, so I'll be running the meeting. If we might have a pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence, please. Thank you again and welcome everybody. Before we call the roll call, just want to indicate that as far as public hearings, item number 2, which is regulation change, item number 3, Tour 38 Zion Hill Road, and number 4, 615 Plains Road have been postponed by the applicant, so we'll be hearing only, I believe it's 3 matters today for new business and public hearings. Meg, if we might get a roll call, please.
Sure. Mr. Castagnoli.
Here.
Mr. Hirsch.
Here.
Mr. Collegian.
Present.
Mr. Moore.
Present.
Mr. Zaharidis.
Here.
And Mr. Sadi. Did I miss anything?
Present. Thank you very much. We have new business, 28 Bayshore Drive, Attorney Lynch's petition for a coastal area site plan review to construct a new single-family dwelling at map 29, block 585, parcel 4, of which Lisa Lombard is the owner. You have the floor, Attorney Lynch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, members of the board, my name is Thomas Lynch. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Lynch, Trimbicky, and Boynton, and my office is located here in Milford at 63 Cherry Street. And it's my pleasure to be here tonight with my clients, John and Lisa Lombard. John and Lisa have worked with Ron Wasmer and Jim Deno, their architect, and I for just about the last year to prepare plans to present to the various city departments for their construction of their new residence located at 28 Bayshore Drive. I think we're all familiar with the location of the site. It's located on basically the westerly end of Bayview Beach before the tidal creek that flows into Long Island Sound. That end of the beach is Bayshore Drive, and once you cross over the tidal creek, it becomes Melba Street. So we're before you tonight with plans. I'm going to be turning things over shortly to Ron Wasmer just for him to go through the specifics of the CAM application. But just by way of background, David has up on the screen, and you've all seen the plans that we've submitted, and they're on the agenda for tonight's meeting. The property, again, located in Bayview, it's in the R5 zone. Property is a rather large lot in that area. The R5 zone requires a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet, and this parcel is some 8,700 square feet in size. It's roughly 40 feet wide by 182 feet in length, traversing back to Long Island Sound. And John and Lisa had bought this property back in 1997. Their existing home is approximately 2,200 square feet. It contains 3 bedrooms along with a non-conforming or zoning non-compliant detached garage to the front end of the property. So there are a number of existing zoning nonconformities with the site as it exists right now. And the first step of our process before appearing before you tonight was to appear before the Zoning Board of Appeals last August. We filed an application for a side yard variance on one of the sides to reduce the required setback from 5 feet to 4.34 feet. The garage was also, is part of these plans that we'll be going through with you, will also show that the non-conforming garage is going to be removed so that the new structure will have a 2-car garage contained in with the building, the building itself. As I said, we appeared before the ZBA, the variances were granted. The new home, David, if we can go to maybe the elevations first, and then I'll go back to the floor plans. But here's the elevation of the new home. It's a rather spectacular house. It's some 5,000 square feet, roughly 4,700 square feet in size. It's going to have 3 levels of living space. Each of the first 2 levels of living space are going to have 2,200 square feet, and then the loft area at the top will have roughly 360 square feet. The roof line was a question that we had to address with the zoning office before we got to this point. There was discussion after Stephen Harris's initial review of the plans as to whether or not the what we call the bowed roof section in the front was zoning compliant. We did get verification from Jim Deno that, without elaborating on it, that the design of the roof did have eaves, which qualified to measure the roof, the height of the building, actually, to the midpoint of the roof line, so that it's been determined now. I have an email that Joe Griffith had issued back in April 12th, and then your summary submitted to you tonight by both Steve and David verify that the zoning office has determined that the building height is compliant. As a matter of fact, all elements of the building are compliant. We did receive the variances for the side yard, but the length of the building coverage, the lot coverage, all of those items are compliant with our zoning regulations. The building is also compliant with our FEMA regulations. The plans have been reviewed by Greg Podleski, the city engineer. His report is on the website, and I believe you have it, where he has found, absent some minor additions or comments that he addressed, he finds that the plans are acceptable. He also notes that the first floor living space is set at elevation 16, and in this zone, the minimum clearance is 15 feet. So again, as it relates to the FEMA requirements, the breakaway walls that are set forth in the lower level of the house, the building is fully compliant with both the zoning regulations and the FEMA requirements. Lastly, if we can go to the floor plans, David. All right, Jim has submitted the floor plans to you. The lower level is going to have a 2-car garage with a very large storage area to the shore side of the house. The first floor of living space, as I said, is some 2,200 square feet. It's going to have an entry foyer, a very large kitchen, large great room, a den, all leading out in an open floor plan out to the deck. The second floor will have a master bedroom and 3 other bedrooms. There'll be a total of 4 baths there. That is an additional 2,200 square feet. And as I mentioned, the third floor loft has a area that can be set up as either a family room or a rec room, maybe an additional bedroom, however the Lombards want to lay that out. But that loft area is 360 square feet of living space. So I'm going to turn things over to Ron. He can briefly touch base on the application itself. I don't think that there's a lot of comment that really needs to be made about that. This has been reviewed by the zoning office. We're presenting it to you tonight. And as I said, it's a beautiful home that my clients are looking forward to building in the Bayview area and become residents of Milford. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Ronald Wasmer, professional engineer, land surveyor with an office at 158 Research Drive. Tom did a great job giving you an overview of the project. I don't really think there's too much I have to add. It's a coastal area site plan. The coastal resources within the vicinity of this property are beaches and dunes and the coastal flood hazard. We will not have any adverse impacts to the coastal resources, and the house will be built in compliance with flood hazard requirements. Tom had mentioned that the city engineer has some minor items to add to this, he wants added to the site plan, but stated these can be a condition of approval. I think that David kind of glanced through the site plan too in the beginning when Tom had it up, so I won't belabor the point, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Do you have any questions by the members of the board? I'll look to my left. I see none. Looking into the right. For you, Ron, no questions. Does anyone have questions for Attorney Lynch? Appears to be none at this point. So do you have any closing arguments to make, Mr. Lynch? Thank you very much. This is new business. It's not a public hearing. So this presentation is closed. Is there any discussion further by members of the board? Seeing none, the acting chair, will take a motion if it's so desired by members of the board. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Acting Chair. I move to approve as presented the petition of Thomas Lynch, Esquire, for a coastal area site plan review to construct a new single-family dwelling at map 29, block 585, parcel 4, of which Lisa Lombard is the owner.
Do we have a second?
Mr. Chair?
We need to get the administrative summary.
You can have that if you'd like, but I was going to suggest that in the motion, it should be amended to include the comments of the city engineer in his letter dated November 1st of 2021.
Mr. Moore, would you be willing to take that as an amendment?
Yes, please add that as an amendment, please.
Okay, so we have an amendment that's proffered by Mr. Moore. Do we have a second to that amendment? Mr. Castagnoli did both hands, so Mr. Castagnoli will be the second. David, your administrative summary, I forgot to have you give us that, please.
The applicant proposes to construct a single-family dwelling of 35 feet in height, located in the VE 13 zone. The dwelling is zoning compliant with variances approved on 8/10/2021 for the east yard setback, eave projections, and proposed deck. There appears to be no adverse impact to coastal area resources. The city engineer would like some added details to the plan, but they can be made a condition of approval.
Thank you, Mr. Sulkus. Are there any questions of Mr. Sulkus by members of the board after the motion was made? Seeing none, can we take a roll call, please?
Mr. Castagnoli.
Yes.
Mr. Hirsch.
Yes.
Mr. Collegian.
With the motion.
Mr. Moore.
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharidis.
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi.
With the motion?
Thank you.
Passes. Good luck, Mr. Lynch and your clients. Thank you. Item number 2 on our posted list is Milford Affordable Housing Plan. Do we have somebody speaking on behalf of the city?
I guess I can jump in.
I didn't hear you.
I guess I can jump in if there's nobody else.
Well, if that's the position, I would like to get permission to move out of order because we have people that are members of the public. Joe, you going to come up and speak on this? Okay.
If I may.
You may just identify yourself with your address, please. Thank you.
I'm Joe Griffith. I'm the Director of Permitting and Land Use. And here just presenting very briefly this affordable housing plan. And Dave, please jump in if I'm misspeaking, but I think very simply the state of Connecticut has required through the Regional Planning Council the city of Milford to adopt a affordable housing plan. I believe it's been distributed to you, and it's been worked on by various city agencies and departments over, I believe, the past year. And then it's presented in front of you in its final form. The state statute, I believe, requires that it be adopted by the city of Milford, so it's presented to you tonight for adoption. So if there are any questions, I'll try to answer them, although I'm not sure I'll be able to. But.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of the members of the board? I just have one question. It makes reference to every 5 years, so this appears to be the first time this is coming before us for a possible vote.
This year's, yes, correct.
And
This year's
even
plan.
though, so it doesn't go back to 2000, this is the first time it's come up, and then we'd have to take another vote in 5 years if the
Correct.
statute stays.
I believe
Thank
every
you.
5 years.
Anybody have any further questions for any questions, Mr. Griffith? Seeing none, I will listen to any motion if they want to make one. Thank you. Mr. Castellano, I recognize you first, please. Sorry, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve as presented the adoption of the City of Milford Affordable Housing Plan prepared by RKG Associates for the South Central Regional Council of Governments as required by CGS 8-30J.
Do we have a second? Mr. Moore, note the second at this point. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, if we can get a roll call, please.
Mr. Castagnoli. Mr. Hirsch.
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
With the motion.
Mr. Moore.
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharidis.
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi.
With the motion, so it passes unanimously. Thank you. The next order of business is 543 Plains Road. And this is a public hearing, petition of Kevin Crusaden, Esquire, for a cluster development at map 62, block 928, parcel 8, of which Nicholas Marlowe and Daniel Thornburg are the owners. You might proceed, Attorney Crusaden. Thank you very much. Identify yourself and then your additional speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Kevin Crusaden. My office is at 3 Lafayette Street here in Milford. With me tonight, it's Jeff Gordon from Codispoti and Associates, also my client, the owner, one of the owners and one of the applicants, Dan Thornburg, is also present to either answer questions or also to show his support. Just by way of background, the board may remember about a little over a year ago, we were in front of you for a zone change because this parcel was half R30 zone and half R18 zone. We came in and asked this board to change it to unify it to all R18 zone, which the board approved back then. At the time, we had mentioned we would be coming in with some type of plan of a subdivision. And this is that plan. It's a proposed cluster development, and under your zoning regulations, as a cluster development subdivision, we're required to comply with the subdivision regulations and the cluster regulations. The cluster development, the board probably does not see as many these days as they used to in the past, just like, subdivisions of, more than, 3 or 4 lots here and there. But the purpose of it, and Mr. Sulkus had pointed it out in his administrative summary as well, or a portion of it, to promote the appropriate use of the land and the population density, to facilitate adequate design and economical provision of streets, to preserve natural resources of the city, and to provide flexibility in the design of the development by permitting a variation in lot requirements. So by clustering, if we meet the requirements of the regulation and the board sees fit to approve it, where the applicant is allowed or the property owner is allowed to cluster down the lot sizes. And in this case, this was done for the following reasons. Number one, it provides more open space that's going to be deed restricted. That's at the end of the cul-de-sac. It's a little over a half an acre. If we were here under a traditional just a straight traditional subdivision regulation, the requirement would be 10% of the land, which would be about 0.3 of an acre. So this is double the open space requirement. Secondly, the applicants wanted to preserve one of the houses on the property. There was I don't know if all 3 houses are still standing, but there was 3 houses originally. The plan is to retain one house that one of the applicants is residing in, and I believe plans on residing in the near future. And if we had to come in under the traditional subdivision regulations, we would not be able to do that. This is a private road, and Mr. Gordon will get into the site plan aspects of it. But as a private road, the applicant or the owners will be responsible for the paving, repair, maintenance, construction, plowing, garbage pickup. There's not going to be any city services. We've had Mr. Gordon and the applicant have had meetings with Mr. Saley about that. Mr. Saley has provided some comments to Greg Podlusky, which show up in his May 2nd revised engineering memo. With respect to, there's a condition that, no city services be provided other than emergency services, but none of the traditional city street services or garbage pickup would be provided. The city attorney and I have spoken many times over the past week or so regarding this. I provided him some documentation laying out the deed restrictions that would impact the owner of each lot, so that people are fully aware that they are 100% responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the open space lot, as well as the city streets, the private road, and the garbage pickup, to include bulk pickup and recycling. That's included in that document as well. The city attorney today agreed in part. I'm not sure if you have his email, but in full disclosure and fairness, I want to point out that he said he doesn't have any issue with the language proposed in our proposed deed restriction, but he wants the zoning board to be aware that one of the some of the language we have in the regulation is that this open space is not open to the public. It's just supposed to be preserved in its natural state or for passive recreation, but it's not a public space, and one of the main reasons for that is liability. So I wanted to point that out. The city attorney asked me to point that out to you. And the other thing that he wanted pointed out is that to make sure that at least the open space is owned in an association that's a legal entity by the state of Connecticut. The overall subdivision, according to the regulations, can be managed in a variety of ways. We haven't landed on the final way that the applicant hasn't landed on the final way they want to manage it. But as long as I think the point of the fact that it's a private road and that those residents would be obligated to take care of those services on their own, either individually or through a service, is clear. I think that requirement is satisfied. I'll be followed by Mr. Gordon unless there's any questions of me with respect to the application.
So any questions? Mr. Hirsch, please.
Good evening, Attorney Custodian.
Yes.
You said the no city services. Does that include no water, no sewer?
No. No city services such as garbage pickup, plowing, street repair, maintenance, anything like that. The sewer would be is paid for by the homeowner anyway, and the water is the regional water authority, which would be paid directly to the water company. Yeah.
Any other questions? None right now. Listen. I'm sorry.
Kevin, you said the lot sizes are larger than required, or?
They're a little bit, they're reduced. They're less than required. And the reason for that is so there's two things to it. Number one, when you look at traditional subdivision versus cluster subdivision, you're not allowed to come in with more building lots than you would under a regular subdivision. And so that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that it allows some flexibility in the creation of the lot sizes so that you can either preserve open space or preserve a natural resource. And it doesn't require the full 50-foot city streets with sidewalks. We have some flexibility to request a private roadway as is requested here. So the lot sizes are a little bit are undersized, and Mr. Gordon will go over that in detail. They're less than the R18 zone requires. And the board's authorized pursuant to the regulation to approve those lot sizes under this cluster subdivision regulation.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions by members of the board for Mr. Crusade, for Attorney Crusaden? Okay, thank you. You have somebody else, Mr. Gordon? Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Mr. Sulkus. Again, my name is Jeffrey Gordon. I'm with Codispoti & Associates, doing business at 263 Boston Post Road in Town of Orange. I am a planner, landscape architect licensed here in Connecticut. Mr. Sulkus has one of our sheets up there right away, so we can maybe jump into that. But regarding the cluster, this is a neighborhood of clusters. The adjoining subdivision surrounding it is a cluster subdivision, and the one next to that is also a cluster subdivision. In the planning terminology, sometimes this is referred to as a conservation subdivision, because by going with some allocated smaller lots, which there is a formula, there is a table that tells us how big we need to be, we also are able to preserve the open space and do, as Attorney Crusaden mentioned, we're able to have a little flexibility. As you can see on this sheet right here is the widened area that we have dedicated to the road allows us to have a turnoff with a group mailbox for everybody, and that works out well. We have a decorative pavers in the center of that island there to reduce the impact of the look of asphalt, but to allow ease for emergency vehicles to maneuver through there. Again, we're also able to have the concrete aprons. We have, as you can maybe see, offset around, we have a utility easement where we have the electrical coming in there, and we'll show you a little later on, we have a lighting plan, which you generally wouldn't do with a regular subdivision, but we have lighting, and that lighting cost will be based on a house meter and borne by the association or the entity that owns all the lots together there. If we go to sheet SP10, David, will you be able to get to that one? And that basically shows you the lighting plan. And we just have a number of street lights. There's 4 street lights, and if you scroll up to the top, you can kind of see the nightscape, that it's a very modest amount of lighting as how it impacts the area, and there's no spillage or anything of that nature. We also have a site landscape plan that goes with this application, and that's found on sheet SP5. We have street trees that we're providing, and we're providing some buffer plantings along the south border of lot number 6 and adjacent to the mailbox turnaround there to serve as a beefed up buffer to the existing house that you see in the lower left-hand corner. So there are quite a few evergreen trees on the site. There's a lot of vegetation on and adjacent to the site. And one of the things that was requested, that even though it's a private road internally, under the general subdivision regulations, there would be a obligation to put sidewalks and concrete curbs on the Plains Road frontage. Now, we're seeking a waiver of that, and we've addressed that with Mr. Podluski and with Mr. Saley. And the rationale, in part, for that is there's an extensive evergreen plantings, existing trees along the southern border of Lot 1, right adjacent to the road there. Also, what would normally happen is that in order to do the sidewalks and the curbs, we would obviously remove most all of those evergreen trees, and the road would be narrowed. Plains Road would actually have to creep out to be the 10-foot offset of the property, we would actually be narrowing the width of the actual public street there down to a little bit less than 25-foot width. So in that sense, the commission, on some of our other applications on Valley Tool, Shell and Drive and whatnot, are trying to keep the industrial going one way and keeping the residential separated. And this area here is the boundary. That top of Lot 1 there, that's where the industrial zone begins. And that planting, we think, creates a nice visual barrier between the light industrial and the residential. So the condition or the comment that came from Mr. Saley would be that he would recommend the waiving of those curbs and sidewalks, but deferring that to potentially a future date where if the city decided to rebuild and reconstruct sections of Plains Road, that the association or the entity would be obligated to do the sidewalks and curbs along that frontage of Lot 1. And that's, we agree to that as a reasonable condition. There's no reason to do it now. It's something that might not happen for years, if ever, but certainly that vegetative buffer and the width of the street wants to be maintained as it is at present. We have demonstrated we have adequate sight lines for the travel speed on the road. We have a plan profile that demonstrates that. It was on your sheet SP7. And David, did you have that exhibit that talks about that requested waiver? It was emailed to you later today. If not, I have a hard copy here. Okay. That basically just documents everything I just said about the road width and the waiver of the sidewalks and the curbs. So again, on the lot sizes, on sheet SP3, the drainage is privately owned and maintained. We have infiltrators for each building lot that would be required for capturing all the roof drainage on each individual building lot. And then on into the open space, we have infiltrators that would pick up the road drainage. Also, as one of the recommendations from the city engineer, he requested that we put a dry well at the intersection of Plains Road on the southwest corner, I guess, of that, where it intersects with Plains Road. There's no drainage in the street, and there's no ability to connect any drainage, but he wanted to try to pick up a dry well there to prevent a very, very small amount of runoff, basically, from the mailbox location out to Plains Road. He wanted to be able to pick that up. So that was a recommendation that we acquiesced to. Hydrant locations have been shown. Again, it's pretty extensive vegetation. The lot sizes are ranging from 12,500 square feet up to 17,800. So they're not marketably lower than the R18 zone, but again, that way we're able to create the open space, the 0.6 acres of open space. So that's what we're proposing here, and we think that it'll be a nice reuse. Again, the existing site has 3 houses and a small barn on it now, so you're going to wind up with a total of 6 houses and open space when all is said and done.
Are you done, Mr. Gordon? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Any questions?
Just before we get to Mr. Hirsch, can we just let the other 2 members of the board see the document that was just provided to us, which I don't think anybody's seen until just now. So if there are any questions by members of the board, I see Mr. Collegian's hands up first.
Mr. Gordon, thanks for the presentation. The last drawing, referred to as, I believe, the lighting plan, appears to have 7 lots. Could you look at that for us? It's not consistent with the other plan.
The road hasn't changed. The lighting hasn't changed. The lot configuration and back and forth did change, but the lighting is the same.
Can you see what I'm referring to? Lot
Yeah, no,
7?
I understand what you're saying.
Doesn't show up anywhere else.
Yeah, but the light poles and the lighting photometrics are the same. So it really isn't affected. What we're proposing on the subdivision map is the lot configuration. That is just the lighting for the road.
Does it look like 7 lots versus 6 lots?
I'm sorry, I'm...
All the plans show 6 lots, except for this plan shows 7 lots.
Right, but again, that was an earlier iteration, but the lighting is done by a vendor, so it's not
Okay.
easy always to get them to change that, but the road has not changed. Fundamentally, the road is the same, and the lights therein are the same.
Any other questions by the members of the board?
I have a question.
Mr.
So-
Zarides, thank you.
Bottom left corner, that's an existing house that's not a part of this plan?
That's correct.
And that's 539?
Correct.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for you also. Let's talk about the issue of sidewalks. If we go on Plains Road with its intersecting street of Cornfield, the corner property does have sidewalk that leads up to the proposed application for the cluster development, correct?
Well, there's a gap. Obviously, that house at 539...
Could you speak up? I can't hear you, please.
There's no sidewalks in front of 539, I believe. I think the existing condition map, David, maybe is best.
But my point is that you made a comment that you want a waiver, which we would have to do if we approve this, and yet there already are existing sidewalks on Plains Road, slightly to the south, if you would call it that, or slightly to the east, depending on your perspective. But going between Cornfield, heading to your property, there appears to be sidewalks on the corner lot and in the property that was just asked about by Mr. Zarides.
There is Cornfield up into 539, then there's no sidewalk in front of 539. There's a gap before our property. And then after our property, there are no sidewalks going down into the industrial zone.
Right, and if you talk about going down to the industrial zone, so the property, if you're looking into your driveway, the property to the left is not a residential district, correct?
Correct.
So we'd have to make a finding of waiver of sidewalks, and a question I have is, you said that, and I'm trying to find out, the most recent document you just presented to us, was that involving the issue of sidewalks?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I guess that this probably could go to both of you. 593.1 indicates that the applicant shall, doesn't give us a may, but shall submit the written statement of the intended ownership, legal documentation. Can you just explain why this hasn't been done yet before we got this application for the hearing?
Actually, there's 2 things. There's a separate part of that. The deed restriction and how it's going to play out with respect to the garbage and the road, as we talked about earlier. And then the second part of it is, we did lay it out to the city attorney, and he's fine with how it's been presented so far. Like I said, I had talked to him several times. There's several different reasons that section of the regulation is putting the cart before the horse. However, we did say that it was going to be managed in an association, whether that was an incorporated association or unincorporated association, that's what we would, how we would handle it. A lot of those questions are answered in the declaration of deed restrictions that was provided to the city attorney and that he approved the majority of the language of today. So, number one, the documents, if we were going to do a full set of documents, it would be extremely expensive for the applicant to do that. Number two, it's at this stage of the development, it could go in a variety of different ways. It could be a unincorporated association, could be an incorporated association, it could be a co-op. He could decide to file a condominium declaration. And then three, if we present a final or proposed final form of the association, that could be completely legal and fine with Attorney Kersaden and the city attorney, but it might not be fine for a lender who's giving a construction loan, and they might require a different form of documentation. So I didn't want to pigeonhole the applicant into an exact legal document that the board approved, and then if we had to get it changed, we would have to come back to the board. But I think the intent of, I did send an email to the city attorney a week or two ago for that first section saying it's going to be held in private ownership. There's no additional common facilities other than the open space, which would be passive recreation only, and the roadway. And I kind of ticked off, I went down the list answering a lot of those questions in an email to the city attorney, and I believe I had copied Mr. Sulkus on it. I don't know if it's available. But those are so it's not an intention not to. I think we complied with it to date without giving final documents to the board right now.
Thank you. And there's three parts that you were addressing. Mr. Gordon talked about some communication with Mr. Saley, the Public Works Director. I don't believe it's in our record. The communications you'd secondly talked about between you and the city attorney, I don't believe it's in our record. And the third thing is the issue of how the deed restriction is going to go. Our regulations make it very clear it's your burden to provide the documentation before we approve this or don't agree to it.
Yes.
So,
well, it's been provided. Why you do not have it, I do not know. So it's been submitted to the...
You would agree that whoever's been provided to us has got to be provided, whoever you provided to has got to provide it to us for us to make an intelligent decision.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions by members of the board at this point? This is a public hearing. And, I'm sorry, Ethan, I'm sorry. Wait. If you could put your microphone on now.
I just wanted Mr. Sulkus to put up the regulation for a moment on the ownership association documents. Comprising.
Right. So I have copies of the email from the city attorney and the draft declaration of deed restrictions. I have a few copies I can hand out to the board members if you'd like.
Thank you. If we could just wait for a minute until we're done reading the sections of the regulations. Okay, so just before we finish, you have another question, but for the record, would the board members agree we saw 5.9.3.1, and I think we ended at 5.9.4 is what we just stopped. Is there any disagreement on that? No. Okay, Mr. Hirsch, you have an additional question?
Yeah, I didn't hear in your presentation, Attorney Kersaden, anything about a surety being posted.
That would be That would be done once we had an approval. A bond would be pulled as part of the permitting application.
So that would be, so if we approve this project, that would be the next step?
That would be one of the next steps, yeah. That would be required, and I don't recall if it's required of all subdivisions, but whenever you're doing, especially, road work, the city wants to make sure that the work gets completed. So that would be done, correct? Yes, yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions based on the request by Attorney Hirsch, Board Member Hirsch, to review sections 5.931 to 5.9, I think it was 4? Seeing none. Mr. Sulkus, can you give us your administrative summary at this point, please?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can I present these to the...
I'm sorry.
Can I present these to the... Can I hand you a copy of this?
Thank you
This
for
was
waking
submitted-
me up. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Would you just for the record indicate what the documents are going to be sent to Mr. Sulkus, please?
Yes, he has them, but I have a couple of paper copies for the board. One is an email from Attorney Burcham today, which is what I had disclosed in my earlier presentation about his comments on the declaration of deed restrictions in open space. That answers, I think it's number 2 on that section about how the open space is going to be, yes, ownership, maintenance, and operation, and that this document answers that, and this email responds to that. And then secondly, you had mentioned you don't have anything from Mr. Saley. Mr. Saley's, the discussion is memorialized in the form of the city engineer's May 2nd revised memo, where they talk about not requiring, he revises his requirement that Public Works and the city engineer's office is requiring that the sidewalks and curbs be on Plains Road, and it says that it's not in the best interest of the city at this time. I also had a personal conversation with Mr. Saley about it a week or so ago. He mentioned that the city has other plans for that area of Plains Road, and that, but I don't have that memorialized in writing, but that's why he wanted to look into this. He met our project engineer, Bob Weway, out at the site, along with Mr. Thornburg, who's here, and the end result of that is this revised memo from Mr. Podlusky stating that the city is not requiring, that those agencies are not requiring the installation of the sidewalks for a variety of different reasons, and not being in the best interest of the city. But I have 3 separate copies of the city attorney's email and the draft declaration of deed restrictions that I can present. The other was an email to the city attorney just stating out what the form of ownership was going to be. So it wasn't really, which is what I've stated to the board. But I can hand these out
You
to the
can
board.
hand those to Mr. Sulkus, please. And those will be entered as part of the record at the original, at least one of the copies, please.
Okay, thank you.
Do any board members want to read the documents at this point? We're going to wait. Has everybody had a chance to review it? Okay. Mr. Ksoukas, if you could give us your administrative summary, please.
As a proposed cluster development, the board may approve the application if in its judgment it meets the purpose as described in 5.9.1. The development consists of 6 development lots and 1 lot that is set aside for open space that is proposed to be clustered as allowed under section 5.9 from an R18 to an R10 standard as shown on figure 7 under 5.9.4.4. The proposed road will be private and will not be provided city services. The application is substantially zoning compliant with sections 5.9.3.2 and 5.9.4. The applicant's representative, Jeff Gordon, has stated in a letter dated 2/10/2022 to City Planner David Sulkus that a homeowners association shall be responsible for the open space parcel in accordance with section 5.9.4.7, subsection 2. All utilities serving the new and existing dwellings will be located underground. No sidewalks are being proposed for the development. As a private road, sidewalks are not being required by the city engineer. However, the board may require them as a condition of approval under 5.9.4.12, in keeping with the city's policy of providing new sidewalks where there is new construction. The applicant has not provided legal documentation as required to the city attorney in accordance with section 5.9.3.1.2 as required as part of the application per section 5.9.3.1. The applicant requests that they be allowed to create and submit the documentation as a condition of approval. Obviously, this evening, some things have taken place this afternoon where they have presented the city attorney with a lot of that information. But if I understood Mr. Crusaden, and he can correct me, I don't know that all of that documentation has been provided to the city attorney. The application is the applicant is to provide a written statement in accordance with section 5.9.3.1, subsection 1. The letter of 2/10/22 was in response to a staff review of the plans, but shall be submitted as a formal declaration of that use, that a homeowners association would be responsible for the open space parcel in accordance with section 5.9.4.7, subsection 2, and section 5.9.3.1, subsection 1.
Thank you. Is there anything further by the applicant? At this point, do we open up for the public hearing portion?
Kevin Crusaden again. Just briefly, if you look at section 5.9.3, we, both in Mr. Gordon's letter of, I think, February 10th, and there's a separate response to the city attorney that Mr. Sulkus had been copied on in the past week or so that satisfies number 1. It's a written statement of the intended ownership where we say it's going to be an association, and we're just not sure whether it's incorporated or unincorporated. The city attorney did not have any problem with that information at this time or did not think that that was inadequate. And then secondly, for number 2, the legal documentation, which is satisfactory to the city attorney with a couple of comments that he made in that email, assuring ownership, maintenance, and operation of all the private streets, parking areas, sidewalks, utilities, open space, other private improvements. There's no other facilities proposed for the cluster development, which has also been provided to the city attorney, and via that email, he's agreed with that in large part. So that information has been provided. Thank you.
Thank you. To the members of the public, this is a public hearing. If anybody wishes to come up and speak, we'll listen to people. If you want to come up and speak, we'll start with those in favor of the project. And if you would come up, speak loudly to the microphone. What you need to do if you're going to speak is give us your name and your address, please, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Robin Moran. I live at 500 Plains Road. I'm in favor of the project.
Excuse me for 1 minute.
Yeah, can
if
you lower
pull
the microphone?
Microphone down a little bit
There you go.
closer to you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. My name is Robin Moran. I live at 500 Plains Road. I'm in favor of this project. I believe it's a good project for the neighborhood, and it's a nice addition with quality homes. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl McCulloch, and I live at 484 Plains Road. I want to say that I do also approve of this project. I think it will help our neighborhood in bringing up the residential equity.
Thank you. Is anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the application? Seeing nobody else approach, does anybody wish to speak in opposition to the application? I see there are people here, but nobody's coming forward. It appears that we've listened to all the participants that wish to be heard. I did explain to Attorney Crusaden before the meeting started that we would have at least a quorum. We now have 6 members, and the question is whether you want to have this hearing closed and presented by a vote. That's one thing to consider, but before we get to that point, we're going to see if there's any questions by the members of the board. Mr. Moore?
The only question that I have is in regard, for Mr. Sulkus. If we approve or make a motion for this application, should we continue to propose the 3 conditions as stated?
Yes.
Okay, any further questions by the members of the board? Mr. Crusaden, if you want to speak to first the people that spoke, that's up to you. But then the next question is, do we keep this open until we get a full board, which we hopefully will, or do you want to try to close the hearing and take a vote tonight?
We'll ask that you close the hearing and take a vote tonight, please.
Okay, the hearing will be closed. I see nobody else that wishes to speak. Do we have any questions by the members of the board before we take a vote? Okay, I'll listen. If anybody wishes to make a motion regarding this particular project. Mr. Moore, thank you.
I move to approve with the following modification, the petition of Kevin Crusaden, Esquire, for a cluster development at map 62, block 928, parcel 8, of which Nicholas Marlowe and Daniel Thornburg are the owners. The proposed conditions are as follows. The applicant shall submit documentation that is satisfactory to the city attorney for the following. It shall submit documentation as stated in section 5.9.3.1, 1 and 2, ownership association documents. 2, shall submit documentation as stated section 5.9.4.7, 2, open space association documents. And 3, city engineer conditions in the report dated 4/19/22, letters A through H, general comments 1 through 5, and the supplemental comments in the letter dated 5/2/22. And optional, shall install sidewalks on the new proposed private streets.
Is there a second by any member of the board?
Second.
Mr. Castagnoli is a second. We now have a motion. We have a second. Is there any discussion by members of the board? Mr. Hirsch?
I don't believe that we should require the installation of sidewalks in this development. It's a private development. If they don't want it, they shouldn't have it.
Anybody have any other further comments they'd like to make?
Are the sidewalks optional? Dave? The sidewalks are optional?
That's why it's listed as optional. It's up to you. It's
Okay,
not,
it's up to
we're
us.
not recommending it, the staff isn't recommending it one way or the other.
Okay.
Mr. Zarides, did you have a question? Okay. The motion as we have it by Mr. Moore is that the applicant shall install the sidewalks. That's where we are at this point, but I have several other concerns that we have. And I have mixed feelings on this because I think that it's appropriate. People have spoken in favor of this. But the public regulations make it pretty clear that there's supposed to be certain materials provided with each applicant. And two of them appear to be missing in this application. One is the statement of ownership. I don't agree with the argument by Mr. Crusaden that the last email that we saw, last documents we saw at the last minute is sufficient to meet the requirements. And the point is that when you look at the requirements that are in place, cluster of developments have certain places to fit into the community's rubric and its life, but they're also limited in how they go about doing that, and that's 5.9.3. The other thing is that 5.9.33 talks about a surety upon final approval, but it appears to be, so we understand, only for whatever proposed improvements the board has required. It wouldn't include improvement on the site plan. I'm also very concerned about the lack of clarity, and we have unsigned documents as to how this open space can be treated. Those are my concerns. I'm sharing it, and I'm putting it on the record that I don't find that under 5.9.3 and 5.9.4 that this is zoning substantially compliant. I don't think it's compliant at all. Anybody have any further? Mr. Hirsch?
Getting back to your comment, Mr. Sadi, the surety, can you go to the provision, Mr. Sulkus? And this is something I wanted to bring up also, is it says final approval of the proposed cluster development. Aren't we the final approval? So if we're the final approval, it's contingent upon the applicant posting a surety. So isn't the first step to post a surety and then us to give final approval? I'm a little unclear on that.
I think that we all can read the particular regulation. It can be interpreted, as you said, that upon the final approval, they have to post a surety bond. And that has not been addressed either, but I didn't go through all those because the language of that is, what is it they have to post a surety bond for? Let's suppose that we're away from the cluster development. There might be a posting of a surety bond for sidewalks or whatever. So, again, I think that part of the regulation has some ambiguity in it, but that's just my really quick reading of this.
Mr. Chair, if it helps the board, typically if this was a straightforward subdivision and there'd be a surety bond, that would be computed after its approval. Just food for thought.
Thank you. And Mr. Moore, Mr. Hirsch?
Yeah, but I'm focusing on the term final approval. What does final approval mean? Is that final approval by us, or is that final approval by the city engineer? I mean, who's got the power to determine what is final approval of the proposed cluster development?
You are the final approval for the proposed development.
So it says it shall be, which is mandatory language, the word shall, be contingent upon the applicant posting surety. So it seems to me a condition precedent for us granting final approval is the posting of the surety, just by the plain language of the regulation.
For clarity, if it helps, the applicant couldn't post a surety bond for something that hasn't been approved yet.
Mr. Moore, you had a question. Thank you.
In regards to the motion on the table, the optional installation of the sidewalks, is that contingent on the option? It's option for the applicant, not for the board to approve that they shall install the new sidewalks. That's how I present it.
That's a good question that I need clarity on too. In other words, is it their option, or do we say, or is it our option? Is that what your question is, Carl?
Yes, and I thought it was on the optional for the applicant, not for us to propose that they install these sidewalks.
And that's how you meant it when you, yeah.
That is correct.
You understand, Bob?
I do, thank you. Do we have any further comments or questions that are necessary before we go to the final vote? Looking both sides, I see the members are ready to vote. If you might call the roll, please.
Oops, sorry, Mr. Castagnoli. Yes. Mr. Hirsch.
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
With the motion.
Mr. Moore.
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharidis.
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi.
Against the motion.
The motion passes 5-1.
Say again, please.
The motion passes.
Passes 5-1, thank you.
5-1, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Next business is old business. We don't have any old business. Liaison reports, I have none to give. Are there any other committees that need to talk about subcommittee reports? No. On the approval of minutes, I'd ask Mr. Collegian to point out a possible amendment to the minutes of April 19th of 2022 and make a motion if he feels appropriate.
Yeah, I make a motion to amend the minutes, specifically with regard to the vote. I get to read motion failed with the following votes and just eliminate the word carried.
And is that your motion to amend the minutes?
Second.
Is there a second by that? Mr. Moore, second it. I think very quickly about that. It had the language of carried or failed, and we would be striking out the carried because none of the motions carried the last meeting. So it happened twice. It happened with Mr. Collegian's motion. It happened to a motion by Attorney Castagnoli. My motion did have it failed. I guess they want to make sure my motion failed clearly. So we're just asking to amend the minutes to reflect the actual vote. If there's any further discussion necessary, can these be approved by voice vote? Yeah. All say aye.
Aye.
Okay, those amendments are now noted. The chair's report. Given that I have been asked to act as the acting chair, I'd ask to reconsider, and I don't think we have enough votes to do this, but reconsider the issue of remote meetings again. For whatever their reasons are, we have 4 members that can't make the meeting. And had we had certain type of votes, that we wouldn't have enough to pass certain activity. We cannot do so in 2 weeks. We'd have to do so in a month. But I think it's something we should consider. I know that there's been a very important and reasonable discussion about this over the course of time. And I believe that some members did indicate that, look, if times are changing, we should reconsider this. Again, only by going what the news can tell us. There's another variant of the coronavirus coming around, and it may be more infectious than others, may make a difference. But I'm concerned that, and we don't have to have people tell us why we're not here. It's not our business if they don't wish to tell us. But when we were doing Zoom meetings, people could be in different states. People we know were traveling for business and dealing with the meetings and showing up, and there was substantial participation with all our votes taken care of. It's something we ought to consider. The question is, do we want to have any further discussion about it tonight? And I leave that up to the board members to consider if they want any further discussion on it now. Mr. Hirsch?
Thank you, Mr. Sadi. I was watching a few weeks ago, there was a Connecticut Supreme Court hearing involving a former judge. And one of the Supreme Court justices was appearing remotely. So you had the four justices and present in Hartford at the Supreme Court, and you had one from her home, wherever she lives. So if it's good enough for the Supreme Court to do that, I don't see why it's not good enough for us to do something similar.
And just so some people may or may not notice, but the governor's rule regarding remote meetings, and the authority to give those has been extended beyond, I think it was going to be ending shortly, but continued to 2024?
My understanding is it's in perpetuity.
Till perpetuity?
Yeah.
So the question is, we want to have a full discussion tonight about whether a month from now we are in a remote hearing or not. Well, I think we should have the discussion, at least starting. Mr. Hurst made a good point that the highest court in our state had remote hearings. The problem we recognize that we have is that we cannot really have a hybrid meeting based on what we've been told we can have. And I know there's a phone connection to my left. I know that I sat on a board that we were here, and we did have a member that was the key vote at that particular time called in. And that would be, it wasn't called a Zoom meeting, but it was at least they're allowed to be remote. You know, the towns that I meet with regularly when I'm on the South Central Regional Council of Governments, a good substantial number of them, although smaller in size, are doing hybrid and or Zoom. Most of them are still not in their buildings. A few are. But I think that's something we should be really considering, and it impacts people with work too. I mean, people may just have a cold, but you know, we have to consider that. I don't think anybody wants to make a motion tonight to have us go into a Zoom meeting. If we have to, we recognize, as we've had the discussion earlier, has to be a month in advance. We do know that the agenda, at least for 2 weeks from now, requires at least one public hearing. That's been postponed, so we couldn't have it in 2 weeks, but the question is, will we decide to do that in June? Or we just want to wait another 2 weeks and see what the landscape is, as they say, regarding remote hearings. And if anybody wants to speak further, I'll listen. If not, there's no motion. We'll just go to the next part of the business we have to deal with. Okay, seeing none. Mr. Sulkus will take your lengthy staff report. Thank you.
I just gave it.
It was so quick I didn't hear it.
That's how brief it was.
Thank you. So, is there anybody that wishes to make a motion to adjourn that has not been heard previously? So, Mr. Zarides, did you raise your hand? No. Oh, so it was Castagnoli raised his hand. Okay. I guess that's, since he raised the hand, we'll take that motion under advisement. We don't have to table it, right? We can rule on it today. Thank you very much, Mr. Castagnoli. We're adjourned. I will not see you in 2 weeks. I'll see you in a month. Thank you.
As will I, just to let you know.
And Dave and I will not be in the same place together, in case you're worried.